Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Acid Soils Filling the Bare Patches webinar with Dr Jason Condon and Jenny Curtis. My name is Alex James and it's a pleasure to be online with you today. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and cultures. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. The Small Farms Network Capital Region has been rethinking how to deliver training events for small farmers to deal with the challenges of COVID-19. Historically, we have held workshops on farm in our beautiful part of the world. But now we are adapting to new ways of delivering information. This webinar format is allowing us to reach new audiences from wider afield, so it is a really exciting time for us. Today we have people from regional New South Wales, Tasmania and Victoria. Some of you will have met me at workshops, so it's nice to say hello from my home to yours. To all our new participants, welcome and thanks for joining us here today. So just a little bit about the network. We are a community-based group led by farmers for farmers based just outside of Canberra. Our services include organising workshops and webinars, newsletters, organising group vaccination programs for livestock, such as the Good Air Vaccination Clinic for sheep. We have a Facebook page, a website, and a website packed full of information. Our workshops and webinars are designed specifically for small farmers, giving you skills-based information where and when you need it at times that suit you. We offer annual memberships for a range of services, including a member's email, advance notice of events, and special member events. Membership is available now on our website and it costs just $22 per annum. Our committee is run by volunteers, and what an amazing group they are. Their hard work made this webinar and many other projects possible. Thanks to Jenny Curtis for volunteering her time to help organise and speak at this event. And thanks to Haji DeCinza for technical support. Thank you to Jason Condon for spending Saturday morning with us and donating his time to the network for this event. Thanks also to the staff at New South Wales Local Land Services for their ongoing support, and in particular thanks to Helen Smith, Agricultural Advisor based in Braidwood. This webinar is supported by South East Local Land Services with funding from the Australian Government's National Land Care Program. So now I'm just going to explain a little bit about how you can participate as an attendee and what to expect from the webinar today. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, you will see this, this panel pop up. You'll notice that you are muted and that your video is turned off. And you will also see a chat function there. During the webinar, you can participate by asking a question in the chat panel on your screen. You can choose to send a question just to the panelists or to everyone. When you choose the panelists and attendees, your question is seen by everyone and will be recorded. When we come to the question and answer session later in the webinar, can you please use Jason or Jenny's name when you ask a question, and then I'll be able to feed it back to them. We are recording this session and a recording link and webinar summary will be published on our website. The webinar summary will include references and links to Jason that Jason discusses during the webinar today. After the webinar, you will be directed to a survey. It would be wonderful if you could complete this survey to help us plan and improve our webinars. You can also provide any feedback to me via email and also in the chat box, and then that will also help us today. The webinar will run for approximately an hour and 15 minutes. If we have a lot of questions, it may go for 5 to 10 minutes longer. Jason will present for about 30 minutes and I will be sharing a video from Jenny's farm. We hope you can stay with us and enjoy the webinar. So Now I'm just going to stop my screen share and I'm going to share with you a video from Jenny. So that won't take a minute just to set that up. And this is Jenny Curtis from the Small Farms Network, and she's just going to tell us about her experience on her property with bare patches.
Hi, welcome to Rugeley Farm. We're a small farm in Bywong running baby doll sheep that we breed and also growing veggies. We've been here 22 years and I'm standing in a paddock where we've had soil tests last year and found that we have a pH of 4.5. Obviously we've had some good rain since February and a lot of this paddock has really come back well. But one of the things we're really struggling with is we still have these bare patches. So in the middle of all this grass that's growing back, we have these patches where nothing grows no matter what we do. We sow seed, I've put compost here, and still in these patches, if I swing this hoe, it's dry as, even though we've had all that, and very, very hard, even though we've had all that rain. And compared to just a couple of metres away, we've got beautiful, soft, moist soil. So I'm really puzzling about what that's all about. And the Small Farms Network committee quite a few of us have been puzzling about these bare patches because we have them both on bush blocks and blocks like this that have been cleared. So we have recently got some funding for a 2-year project, which is a little bit exciting, and it's called Making Small Farms in the Southern Tablelands Count. And part of this project is one about bare patches and so it's called the Grassy Ground Covers Project, and it's all about tackling all these bare patches on the basis that if we can get all these bare patches across the landscape, or a lot more of them actually growing grassy ground cover, then we can be more productive, whether it's for habitat or whether it's for grazing and other activities that we use our small farms for. So I'm really looking forward to this webinar from Jason, because with a pH of 4.5 here, that's obviously one problem that potentially in the soil here, but it doesn't answer my problem about why is that bare patch there when nothing particularly different happened to that area compared to all this area around it where grass is growing fairly well.
So I'm just stopping my screen share with you now, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Jason Condon. Jason has a passion for agriculture, soil chemistry and sustainable farming. He has taught at CSU for more than 20 years. So Jason, would you like to jump in there and say hello? Hi.
Yeah.
We can see you, thanks.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me. And so I've got a presentation that talks through some of the soil acidity issues, and picking up on what Jenny said there, you know, the acidity is just one component that may be leading to these bare patches. So it's like a foundation that we can work from.
Yeah,
so,
that was a lovely introduction from Jenny. Thanks, Jason.
Yep. So I will share my screen. That's good, Alex. Can't hear you,
Sorry,
Alex.
yes,
yep.
I'd muted myself, so I didn't interrupt you. So yes, it looks lovely, thank you.
Very good.
Okay.
So so I represent New South Wales DPI and also Charles Sturt University, and my specialisation is soil science and soil chemistry. So let's take a closer look at soil acidity. Now, I know you all have various backgrounds and experiences in agriculture, and you know, as I go through this, some of the stuff you'll know and some of it might be new, but we'll just cover everything, and that way we're all, at the end of it, we're all at the same place. So when we talk about acidity, we measure it as pH, and the H bit is the acid. So it's a hydrogen ion in the soil. So the more hydrogen ions you have, the more acid the soil is. And the pH ranges from 0 to 14. And anything less than 7 is considered acid, and anything greater than 7 is alkaline. So it's always important to remember it's the hydrants, that H, capital H, is the issue. So if the soil's becoming more acid, there's more hydrogen ions getting around. And if the soil becomes more alkaline, you've got less hydrogen ions. So we can add things to the soil to get rid of hydrogen ions, and the pH will get bigger, will increase and become more alkaline. In soils, soil pH ranges from about 4 to 9, and there's a bunch of chemical reasons why you don't get less than 4, and you don't normally get too much higher than 9. So most soils fit in this range, and we care about soil pH because it basically does that. You can see in that photo, that's some clover. The soil is the same soil, but it's been treated to change its pH. So we've added hydrogen ions or taken hydrogen ions away. And normally when I present this sort of stuff in a room, you'd ask the audience, what do you see? So I'm going to ask you. You don't answer necessarily, but I want you to think about it. What do you see in that photograph? What are the key points? And most people will see that, okay, well, pH makes a difference to plant growth. Now, the amount of difference that pH makes to plant growth depends on the plant. So plants will have different sensitivities to acid conditions. And in this case, you can see that, this clover quite likes to be around pH 7, and as you become more acid from 7, productivity or plant growth decreases right down to pH 5, where the plant's actually quite struggling. But interestingly with pH, if you go the other way, there's actually a really rapid drop-off as well. So at pH 7.6, the plants are looking just as bad as at pH 5. So plants and microorganisms living in the soil often have an optimum pH that they like to exist at. And as a broad generalization, around neutral, most things are pretty happy. Now at really low pHs, there are some plants that can tolerate that. There are some organisms that can tolerate that and might even prefer that. But as a general rule, in the middle is good. So pH has a pretty large effect on plant growth and the function of the soil as well. So we've seen that it affects plant growth, but why does it do that, or how does it do that? Largely, it's not the hydrogen ions that hurt the plants. It's the conditions that are created by changes in pH. And so one of the major ones that we deal with is aluminium toxicity. And here's a graph, and on this graph, on the axis down the bottom here, or the x-axis, we've got pH measured in calcium chloride, and there's many different ways to measure pH, but in Australia, we measure it in calcium chloride, which is just a weak salt, or it can be measured in pure water. And for when we talk in agriculture and dealing with plants, pH in calcium chloride is like a preferred measure, simply because that weak salt represents pretty much the sort of salt concentrations that you'll see in the field just with normal nutrition that exists, because plants don't grow in pure water. And so soil pH and calcium chloride represents what most plants would be experiencing in normal soils. So that's our x-axis, and it's down here at 3.5, which I've already told you most soils don't get to. So we expect to see the action starting around 4, and then as the pH goes up to 6.5, this is a range of pHs covering acid soils. And of course, down around 4, you'd call that severely acid. But yeah, so x-axis is pH. On the y-axis, this is percent aluminium, and it's the percent of the cation exchange sites in the soil that are occupied by aluminium. And to just give you an idea, if you've done soil testing, you'll always get back a concentration of cations: calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. They are all cations, which simply mean they have a positive charge. And the name actually gives it away. All of those words end in IUM. So the nutrients that end in IUM are cations: calcium, sodium, potassium, magnesium, ammonium. They're all cations. But and they, because they're positively charged, they can stick to things that are negatively charged in soil. And clay components in soil have a negative charge. And so, and some organic matter can have a negative charge as well. So we want to know how many sites are in the soil that have a negative charge that can hold cations. And that property is called our cation exchange capacity. It's how many negative sites can hold cations. And so soils that have a lot of clay will have a high cation exchange capacity. Sands that have not much clay at all will have a very low cation exchange capacity. And so with this percent aluminium, we're saying of all those negative sites in the soil from the clay and organic matter, what percentage of those are actually filled up with aluminium? And this range on the y-axis goes from 0 up to 80. So, if we picked 50, then at 50, an aluminium percentage of 50, half of the negative sites in soil would have aluminium stuck to them. And that's important because whatever's not stuck to a cation exchange site is just floating around in the soil solution and can get leached away, washed away, and it may not be available to a plant through time. So the cation exchange capacity is definitely a measure of soil nutrition, but only if good nutrients are stuck to it. And aluminium is not a good nutrient. I'll show you why in a minute. But so this graph, pH on the x-axis, aluminium percent on the y. And this is the relationship between pH and aluminium. And again, I'd say to you, well, what do you see there? And some key points are this. As pH decreases, you get more and more aluminium occupying those cation exchange sites. So as the pH moves down to the left, you get more aluminium. And you might get in some soils at pH 4, you've got almost 80% of the exchange sites are aluminium. And so those soils will not have much calcium, magnesium, potassium, because aluminium is the dominant cation, and it basically kicks off all of those good nutrients and puts them in solution where they can get washed away, leaving only aluminium. The other thing to see from this graph is that as the pH increases, the aluminium starts to become less of a dominant cation. And that's because as the pH increases, the aluminium turns from a plant available form into an unavailable form. And so when it's unavailable, it doesn't show up on our cation exchange site anymore. And so it could still be in the soil, but a plant can't get it. So it's not available. It's not able to be toxic anymore. And on toxicity, I should say, most plants, there are plants that are able to tolerate aluminium, and there are plants that are sensitive to aluminium. Plants that are sensitive to aluminium will start struggling at around about the 5% mark. And so that basically means that if you've got a pH in calcium chloride of 5 or less, you could start having problems due to aluminium toxicity. The really aluminium tolerant plants, they might start showing symptoms at around 30%. So you can see that, as the pH decreases, aluminium becomes a problem. And if it becomes, once the aluminium gets over 30%, even the most tolerant plant will start to struggle as well. And of course, the third point from that graph is that there is a massive scatter, vertical scatter. And so you could have a pH of 4.5, and that could mean that you have no aluminium, available aluminium, or it could mean that you're up around 30%. So there is a scatter. So it's not good enough to know just what your pH is. You need to know what your aluminium percentage is as well. And that you can get that from the soil test report. So key thing with this, aluminium becomes a problem once the pH gets below 5 in calcium chloride. It's highly variable, and that's variable because there's lots of differences in soils, in the parent material, how much actual aluminium is there anyway. how much organic matter is there, because it can tie up some of this aluminium, and so there's a bit of soil chemistry magic going on. Okay, so what does this aluminium toxicity do? It effectively reduces root growth, and it does that. This is a picture of a root hair, like a very, very small piece of root, and the bottom bit is a healthy root, and the top one is one that's grown in with aluminium, plant available aluminium in the solution. And so it actually stops cellular growth of the root, and that roots get bigger and longer because they grow new cells at their tips. And so once aluminium gets stuck in those cells, they can't grow and they don't expand. And so you end up with short, stubby roots. And that, of course, means that the roots can't get through the soil. They can't take up nutrients and water at depth. It makes them very susceptible to dry conditions because they don't have access to stored water lower down. To give you an idea, these are just some seedling shots. And so on the left-hand side, you've got a low aluminium condition. So it's the same plant, same variety of plant, grown for the same amount of time. And as you can increase the percentage of aluminium, you can see the effect that that's having on the root length. And so at the very high aluminium concentrations, you get these short, stubby roots that I was talking about. Okay. The other thing that happens if you've got a legume is that the nodulation. So legumes fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, and they do that by a relationship with rhizobia organisms in the soil, and they create little nodules on the roots, and they're the important bit to create the fixation of nitrogen. And if you've got high aluminium, you'll have low nodulation. And this is a photograph taken only a few weeks ago. This is a lucerne pasture, and down here you can see there's these little white dots. They're the nodules that are existing on this plant. And over here, this plant, there are no nodules at all. And so these two roots examples were taken maybe 10 meters apart in the same paddock. And it was a pH, like the one on the right was very acid and the one on the left wasn't. And so the difference was the effect of aluminium on nodulation. And of course, if you've got a legume that doesn't have nodules, then it's not fixing nitrogen. So it's behaving like a grass almost. It's a passenger in your system. It's not doing anything for you. The other effect of this high aluminium, like I mentioned before, if your cation exchange sites are filled up with aluminium, then the useful cations aren't there, and they can move lower down and get leached lower down. So things like magnesium and calcium, potassium get moved down the profile. And that means that if you've got a bare patch, or you've got a part of your pasture that doesn't look very good, and you think, oh, I better soil test that, and you take a 0 to 10 centimetre soil sample, and you send it off to a lab, it'll come back and it'll say, oh, the soil's really acid, there's lots of aluminium, and there's no magnesium, there's low calcium. And you might think, oh, okay, I need to put those things on to improve my soil. Where in actual fact, if you know that you've got that high aluminium, there's a high probability that the magnesium is just lowered further down the profile, and it might be at 20 centimeters, okay? And that means that if we can fix up the pH and get rid of the aluminium in the topsoil in the 0 to 10, we can actually get the roots to grow down to the magnesium. And so the plant will get what it needs. And that knowledge might actually save you some money, because you don't have to put the magnesium out because it's in the soil. We just need to be able to get the roots to get there. But of course, you need to go looking for it. You need to sample lower down to try to find the nutrients, if the nutrients have moved down, or if you're dealing with a soil that just is inherently low in magnesium. So this is one of the reasons why in acid soils you can get deficiencies of nutrients as well, and it's largely linked to that nasty aluminium. And the final point with aluminium is that chemically it combined with phosphate. So your plant available phosphorus, which makes such a big difference to our plant growth and our root growth especially, aluminium actually binds with it and makes it unavailable to plants. And so to put that in context, if you're putting out P fertilizer, spending money on that, your return for that investment is poor, and the agronomic benefit is poor because quite a bit of what you're adding is actually getting bound up with aluminium in the soil. And some people say, oh, well, that's also taking out the aluminium, which is true, but that's an expensive way of getting rid of aluminium. So I always say, look, you know, if you increase the pH and you get rid of the aluminium, then when you do put on P fertilizer in whatever form you choose to put it on, you're actually getting a much more efficient response of that application. And whenever we add anything to the soil, it's really important that it's efficient. So we're having not using so many inputs and getting as much benefit out of the ones that we do use. That's really important. So that's some. There are others, but that's the major issues that we see with the soil acidity. So low pH, high aluminium, and all the bad things that come from that. So are your soils acid? Like is you've got bare patches? You know, is acidity the problem there? In agriculture, we need to accept that agriculture acidifies soils. No matter what you do, you will be acidifying the soil. So acidifying means you're dropping the pH. As a manager, you might then look for options that then increase pH again to sustain it. That's fine. But the practice of agriculture acidifies soil. And I just want to go through this because it's helpful in understanding why we've got the situation we have and why some things work and some things don't. So when a plant grows and it takes up nutrients from the soil, those cation nutrients going into the plant makes the plant excrete acid into the soil. So the plant, as those positive nutrients go into the plant becomes slightly positive in charge, and it can't become positive, so it excretes hydrogen ions into the soil, so the soil becomes acid. When it does that, the plant has just put acid into the soil, so the plant itself becomes more alkaline. So the plant material is actually an alkaline source, and what will happen is normally that plant material will die at that site, so the alkali gets returned to the soil and in theory neutralizes the acid that was created when the plant grew. So it's a cycle. Now, one of the problems is the alkali gets returned to the surface, which means that the very surface of the soil becomes higher in pH, but the acid that was created by the nutrient uptake is occurring lower in the soil. So it might be at 8 centimeters, at 10 centimeters, at 15 centimeters. So we're getting what we call a stratification of processes. So the alkaline return is happening in the first couple of centimeters and the acidity is happening lower down. So our soil will become acid. The other thing that happens in agriculture, of course, is we actually make use of that plant. We cut it and bale it and sell it, or we put it through an animal and turn it into meat and fiber. And then that animal actually becomes an alkali source. And then, we shear the sheep and we sell the wool, and we're actually exporting alkali, or we harvest the grain, or we sell the hay. We are exporting the alkali, which means our soils stay acid. And so that acidity has to be balanced. We have to bring alkali in from somewhere. And that's what, say, a lime addition is. We're bringing alkali in from somewhere else to put back in our soil to neutralize the acidity that agriculture created. And of course, if you're with me on that and understanding that, then you'll understand that the better producer you are, the more stuff that you're exporting off your property, the more acid your soil becomes. And there are some soils that are naturally acid anyway because of the parent material, the type of rocks and stuff that it's formed. But the processes are all the same. You know, if you are removing material from your property, you are acidifying the soil. Now, for those of you playing along at home, you'll understand that, okay, well, what if I bring in material? What if I buy hay from somewhere and bring it into my farm and I feed it to my stock? I've brought in that alkali, and that's true, you have. And so if we bring in hay or we bring in compost from somewhere else and we add it to our soil, we are adding alkali material to our soil. And there it just comes down to, well, is that what all you're doing, or are you still exporting stuff? So there's a balance there. There's an input and output thing to be aware of. But that is true. If you bring in material from somewhere else, you're actually bringing in someone else's alkali to your soil. Anyway, so that's how we get acid soils. And then the impact on this, another graph for you. So we've got on the x-axis pH again, and on the y-axis now we've got depth going down. The soils people, when they make graphs, they always, on the y-axis, they always put 0 at the top because soil profiles go down. And here, this is work that was done in New South Wales, and it shows pH on a comparison between virgin soil, so stuff that hasn't been used for agriculture, and then a pasture soil, which was subclover pasture, over several decades. And so you can see that the virgin soil pH was over 6, and then after the pastures has happened, so as agriculture has happened, there's been product removal. We've actually acidified the soil quite a bit, like more than a unit, down to 20 centimeters or so. So this is just like the evidence of what I was just talking about with acidification due to agriculture. So it happens. And so we need to be on top of that. We need to be making sure that we are actually bringing alkali back into the system so that we're not degrading the soil and the natural resource by our management of it. Okay, so what can we do? First step is we need to soil test. We need to know what we're dealing with, and that's really important. Soil testing is really important, not just for today, this year, fixing a problem that might exist, but also monitoring our soil through time so that we are aware of what we are doing to it in terms of our management. And so you might do things, okay, I want to add, I want to add compost, or I'm going to lime, or I'm going to get some cow manure and spread it out, or whatever it is that you want to do. But monitoring soil conditions through time tells you what the response of the system was to that management. And I think that as land managers, we all have the responsibility, if nothing else, to measure and monitor what we're doing to our system, and soil testing is really important in that. And so, we want, in terms of our acidity, what's important is the pH is important, but also what the aluminium percentage is. And then you can use those things to determine, well, how does that fit with your system? The species of plants that I have, or the ones that I want to grow, what conditions do they require, and how does that match with what I've got? And then you can start having the conversation about, well, what do I do about that? And so soil testing, there are lots of different things that you can get measured. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But in terms of acidity, the percent aluminium and pH are key bits. You need to then, if you think, okay, my pH is too low, I need to do something about that. We need to make a decision. Do I apply lime? Now I've got lime here. I understand that there are other things that can increase pH. In all the work that I've done, lime's just a really efficient input to increase pH. And I say efficient in terms of the volume or mass of the material added and the dollar return for that investment. So this is a table that we have from New South Wales DPI in an ag fact about soil acidity and liming. And what you have here is a column that has our soil test CEC. So this is our cation exchange capacity, 1 through to 15. So soils that have a low cation exchange capacity would be the sandy soils. Soils with a high cation exchange capacity would be our clay soils or our very organic rich soils. And over here, these columns with the colours in them, this is the first 3 are my starting pH is 4, or it's 4.3, or it's 4.7, and I'm trying to get to a pH in calcium chloride of 5.2, and these numbers is what tons of lime do I have to add to get my pH to 5.2? Okay, so if you're at a CEC of 4 and my pH is 4, then I'm going to have to put around 4 tons on. But if I was at 4.7, then I only need to put about 1 ton on. So that's how that table works. And so that's saying that the closer you are to the target pH, the less you have to put on. And if you look down one of these rows, you can see that as the cation exchange capacity increases, the amount of lime that you need to add to get to your target pH also increases. So our cation exchange capacity, as it increases, you're actually what we call buffering the pH change. So you need to put more lime on to get the same change in pH that you're after. So cation exchange capacity of 4 versus a cation exchange capacity of 9, you've almost got twice as much lime at a cation exchange capacity of 9 to get the same target pH of 5.2. So clay soils with a lot of organic matter, they buffer the pH change that you get from every ton of lime that you apply. Works the other way as well. They actually buffer pH change due to acidification as well. So if you've got within the same paddock, if you've got a sandy bit and a clayey bit, the sandy, and you're doing the same type of practice across the whole lot of it, the sandy bit will acidify faster than the clay bit. Like, it'll change pH, lower pH faster because it's less buffered. So, okay, so that's what's going on in this. Now, I'll just bring you back to pH. We're trying to hit pH 5.2 here as a target, because if you remember that the graph that I showed you with the percent aluminium, once you get your pH above 5, aluminium isn't a problem anymore. So that's what this table was about. It was about how much lime do I need to add to my soil, you know, depending on what its CEC is, to get rid of aluminium. That was what it was about, and that's why that table exists the way it does. On the very right-hand column, it's got up to 5.5. So this is above and over getting rid of aluminium, and this is the amount of lime that you need to add above or to the soil once you get it to 5.2. This is the extra bit that you'd need to add to get it to 5.5. Okay, so that's what this table is about. That's just what most lime, I would say 95% or more of the lime applications that get made are made based on this table. But the information in that table comes from a bunch of research that was done 30 years ago, thereabouts, and it was all done based on throwing lime on the surface and then incorporating it to 10 centimetres. Because 30 years ago, in cropping areas, people would do multiple pass cultivation, and so you would disc and you would scarify and then you would sow, and so or you'd at least have a couple of cultivations, and so mixing was a standard, incorporation was a standard part of the process. But now, like, no one does that anymore. No one does multiple tillage in cropping areas, and of course in permanent pasture areas you don't incorporate anyway. So this table doesn't really relate to modern practices anymore. That's not to say therefore ignore it and what are we going to do. It's just, don't be surprised if you follow that table you don't get the responses that you're looking for, because it's a different system. We know that acidity is not uniform. It is not, there's not a straight line down the profile of pH. It changes as you go down the soil. And so this means that quite often, even after liming, we'll get, if we sample in 0 to 10 centimetre intervals, it might say my pH is 5, therefore I shouldn't have an aluminium problem. but wow, you know, these plants, they're still not growing well. I've still got these bare patches. Like, what the hell's going on with that? And it could be that it's because we're putting the lime on the surface but not incorporating it, and that the acidity that's still within that 0 to 10 exists, but we just don't know about it because of how we're sampling. To demonstrate that as a point, another graph, x-axis pH, y-axis depth down to 12 centimeters, and I've got a little picture there that's roughly the tape measures to the scale of the graph, right? So if you go out there and so the research that I do, we measure pH in really small increments because fundamentally I've got a flawed life. But if you measure that pH, the soil pH from that piece of soil, the profile actually looks like this. So it's what we call a stratified pH profile. So at the surface, the pH is higher, it's up around 6, and this is in calcium chloride. pH is 6, but down at 5 centimeters, 4 to 5 centimeters, it's actually 5.5. Now, you know why the pH is higher at the surface, because that's where the organic matter gets returned. So the alkali is getting returned to the surface. So that's why the pH is higher there. Okay, so if you went out there and you took a 0 to 10 soil sample of that, and it would come back at a pH of 5, like literally the average of all those dots down to 10 centimeters is 5. So your answer in a 0 to 10 mixed sample would be 5. And you would think, it's low. Yes, it's low, but it's all right. You know, I'm okay. But if you went in that very same sample, if you sampled in 5 centimeter intervals, the top 5 centimeters average is 5.3, and the next 5 centimeters is 4.5. Now at 4.5, if I said to you, hey, you know, that soil that you're struggling with, actually at 5 to 10 centimeters, the pH is 4.5. And you'd be going, oh, wow, that's okay. That's an acid problem that you didn't know you had if you sampled in 10 centimeter intervals. And of course, arcing back to that first graph that I showed you, a pH of at 5, you can see you don't really have an aluminium problem. At 5.3, you don't have an aluminium problem. At 4.5, you could have 30%. So you could have enough aluminium there that even your tolerance plants are struggling, right? Or you could have none. You could be, you know, pH 4.5 and have no aluminium. So this is, again, two things important from this slide. We probably need to look at pH in smaller depth increments to actually identify these acid layers. And 2, we must know what our aluminium percentage is. We can't just rely on pH, okay? Now, of course, if you're going to sample in smaller intervals, that means you're going to take more samples to send to the lab, and that's going to get more expensive. And people go, we're not going to do this because it's going to get too expensive. And I say, don't measure everything, right? You can tick boxes and send soil off and get everything measured. It'll cost about $100 a sample, or you can just measure the stuff that you actually need. So you ask for soil pH, EC, so that's a measure of electrical conductivity, which is relating to salt. You get that for the same, no extra cost. It comes in the same analyses. So that's just, you know, soil pH is a given, we need it. EC comes for free. Available phosphorus, so that might be coal well P. We get that because that's an addition that we can add as a manager. Do I put phosphorus fertilizer on or not? So we need to know that. CEC, obviously we need to know that because that's a measure of our soil nutrition, and that's also going to tell us what our aluminium, I'm really struggling with that word today, aluminium percentage comes from that CEC. And then I've got organic carbon there as well, because more and more of what we do, soil carbon, and knowing what our practices are doing to our soil carbon through time is becoming more and more important to know and document that. So I've got that. So those 4 things that I've got there, to get that analysed, you know, $50, that's what that costs. So for 2 layers, for 0 to 5, 5 to 10, might cost $100. But if you measured 0 to 10 and got everything done, that would cost $100. So it hasn't actually cost us any more money. We're just getting more detailed information about the things that actually matter. So that's my way of looking at the costs involved. And of course, those things, those 4 points I've got listed there, they are all things that we as managers can do something about. Like, you know, we can change our pH, we can change our available P, we can change our organic carbon through our practices, and that will impact on our cation exchange capacity. And changing the pH, of course, changes the proportion of those nutrients within our cation exchange capacity. So they're all, if you like, they're all management sensitive things that we can measure from our soil. So I mentioned about those acid layers, and rather than just going out and soil sampling and sending off to the lab and then waiting to see what the results are, there's actually something we can do in the meantime, which will help us identify, is that worthwhile doing those finer increments. So I want to introduce you to a dig stick. Now, some people may have used these before, and the dig stick is the thing on the ground with the red top. This is a Helen. She's not the dig stick. This is the dig stick. And it's just a metal rod with a slot milled in the side of it. So you can bang it into the ground and it takes the soil, a part of the soil profile out. And then you can go down to Bunnings or any nursery shop and buy a pH kit. It's a colorimetric kit. So it has within it, it has a pH dye indicator. So it's just a liquid that changes color at different pH. And of course, if you add a liquid to soil, it turns into mud, which makes it pretty hard to see if the color changes or not. And so in this kit, it has a little white powder with it, which all it does, it just sucks up the color so that you can see what color the indicator changed to. And then, so here we have, this is our dig stick. I've hit it into the ground. I've pulled out a part of the soil core. Because it's got a slot milled into the side, you can actually pull it out of the ground and you can see the soil profile that you've just extracted. You add your color indicator to it and the white powder to it, and then the colors develop. And then this card, you can match the color up to the color cells in the card, and it tells you roughly what the pH is, equivalent to pH in water. So if this came back and said my pH was 7, so the color up the top here is roughly 7, sort of a dark greeny color, that's pH measured in water of 7. And in calcium chloride, that might be 6 or 6.2 or 3 or something like that. So our calcium chloride pH number is always lower than measuring in water for the very same soil. Okay, so so in this example, we've used a dig stick. We went out to a property. They had good patches and bad patches, good and bad patches within the same paddock. And what we found was that the soil pH was up around 6, and well, in calcium chloride, it was up around 6 in the surface couple of centimeters, but after that, it was pH 4, 4.5. And what that was doing was stopping root growth. And then the plants got sick, and then disease got the plants. And so the difference between the good and bad patches, I had a plant pathologist with me, and he's going, oh man, these things have got Rhizoctonia disease. And the dig stick was saying, and it's got that because it's a low pH and the plants are suffering, and now they're more susceptible to disease. So the dig stick's a great tool to go out, hit into the ground, put the indicator on it, and see how stratified my soil pH is. And in this case, the top 5 centimeters, 3 or 4 centimeters is higher. So this is a good example. Based on this dig stick, you would say, yep, I'm going to come back, I'm going to take some proper soil cores, and I'm going to analyze my soil in a 0 to 5 and a 5 to 10 and maybe a 10 to 20 centimeter layer to see what changes occur down the profile. And I'm a big fan of dig sticks because you get together with some mates and you go, right, let's go and look at let's go in this paddock. We'll look at the best bits in it. We'll look at the worst bits in it, see if it's a pH thing. And then we'll go over to your place and we'll have a look at your best bits and your worst bits and see what the difference is. Oh, you've been doing that. You've been putting compost there. Let's have a look, use a dig stick to see what that's like as well. And of course, because you're hitting these things in, you're getting some feedback. You're getting like, wow, there's a hard bit there at, 15 centimeters, or gee, I hardly had to hit that at all, So you're getting these other bits of information. You pull it out and you can see soil color and you can see roots. There's all these things that you can see with a dig stick. They're great. And I think Helen has some, so there's possibility to borrow them. You don't have to buy them, you can borrow them. This is again from the other day. I've already showed you photographs of these plants up close, showing you the nodules, but you can see here within the one paddock, on the left, this is from the good patch, and on the on the right is the bad patch, and where we are actually is a bad patch. So you can see all the bare ground here. There wasn't any bare ground in the good patch. And you can see the color of the indicator. So this is really yellow, so that's indicating acid soil, and it's acid all the way through. And over here, it's 7 in the surface, probably 8 centimeters, and then it's kind of got a green tinge to it, so it's still up around 6-ish, and it's just got acid like lower down around 20 centimeters. There's a bit of acid there. So in this case, what we found in this paddock was the poor patches are actually just an acid zone, and that's why lucerne, which is pretty intolerant to aluminium, is struggling. And you can see here on the left, the roots go all the way down, so that you've got 20 centimeters of root growth, and over here you had, I don't know, 7 centimeters of root growth at best, and 1 root got through. So that these plants were in a world of trouble if the rain stopped, or going into spring when things start to dry out. These things they're gonna end a lot sooner than the soil, the plants that got roots to depth. So dig stick, simple. Like we were in that paddock to do this, there was probably 10 minutes of work involved. So it doesn't take a lot of time or money, but you learn a lot. Okay, so we've got an acid soil. We probably need to improve it. That's our scenario. Can we get lime to move? Because if you've got perennial pastures, or you've got land that's on a slope, you don't want to be incorporating lime into the soil anyway. Can we get lime to move? Another graph for you. We've got pH on the x-axis again, and we've got depth in centimeters down the profile. And this was work that was done now 30 years ago. But what they did was they put lime out at 3 rates, so at 0, 2, and 8, so 0 is the control. They incorporated it to the depth that they could get it into, and then the point of this was to see, how far underneath that zone of incorporation did lime move. So I've already stated that in some cases people don't want to incorporate. That's fine. You just kind of ignore the bit above the depth of incorporation if you're only surface applying. So they mixed the soil, and 5 years later they came back and they measured pH, and that's what it looked like. And again, you've got this stratification happening. So initially this would have been mixed and it would have been kind of uniform, but now we've got more higher pH at the surface, still quite acid, but higher pH at the surface. So this is again that organic matter return to the soil surface for the control. And this little eye is saying this is the depth that incorporation happened, that tillage happened to. When they went to 2 tons, the pH increased. So adding lime increased the pH, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. That's fine. But it only really increased pH to the depth of incorporation, and certainly nothing happened, a few centimeters below that depth of incorporation. So liming at 2 tons, and 2 tons was used to get the pH up around 5 to get rid of aluminium. That would have got rid of aluminium, but it doesn't make the alkali, or the thing that makes the pH go up, it doesn't move beyond the depth of incorporation. So this is saying that if you had an acid soil and you surface applied it, you don't at a target pH to get rid of aluminium, then it's really not going to change pH down the profile much at all. But what they found then was if you went to 8 tons and got the pH higher up, that you can see here that you actually got a pH change below the depth of incorporation. It was statistically significant, down to 12 centimeters in 5 years. So you got, four more centimeters of soil improvement below the depth of incorporation. So this is saying you can get the alkali effect of lime to move down below the depth that you apply the lime. And that's important if you're only surface applying. But, and here's the but, this work, what people took away from this work was that if you want lime to move, if you want the alkali to move, you need to put on high rates. And you know what? I can't afford to do that. So, that's a bit academic. So that was unfortunate, because the message that people took was, if you want lime to move, you have to put high rates on. But when you read the paper about that, that's not what they said. They actually made the point that what the high rates of lime did was it got the pH over 5.5. And once the pH is over 5.5, then you've got excess alkali that can move down. So it's not the high rates of lime that matters, it's getting the pH over 5.5 that matters. And it just so happened that in this soil, because it was so acid, to get the pH over 5.5, they needed 8 tons of lime. But if your pH is at 5, you know, if you're already here, to get the pH over 5.5, that's not much lime at all. That's like, you know, depending on the soil type, there might be a ton of lime to do that. So what I'm saying is that if we want lime to get lower down, don't focus on how much. It's not about how much lime. It's about what is my pH? What do I have to get my pH to get that lime to move down? And the answer to that is it must be over 5.5 to get that lime movement down. Now, to give you an example of that, this is work that was done just east of Wagga, and it was a long-term trial. It went for 18 years, and what they did is they looked at soil pH in 0 to 10 and then 10 to 20 layer depths. And so I'm going to have a series of graphs here. Y-axis is pH, x-axis is time, and it's up to 20 years here because, like I said, their trial went for 18 years. And here we've got 0 to 10, and then we've got 10 to 20. And they had two scenarios. The first scenario was, let's lime to hit that target of around 5, right, to get rid of aluminium. So this is what do we do, or what's the consequence of liming to a pH of 5 to get rid of aluminium? And so what you can see here is through time, we had an acid soil, they added lime, the pH went up, they did agriculture to it for a period of time. Once it got to about 4.8, they re-limed to get over 5 again, did agriculture to it, they re-limed, did agriculture to it. So on average, the pH was 5. Aluminium in that top 10 centimetres would have been minimal. That's fine. What they found was in the 10 to 20, the pH gradually declined. So it wasn't a rapid decline, but it was just a gradual decline. And I'd note here, it was pretty acid, right? So systems that are pretty acid have a slower rate of acidification because all the soil functions are slowing down because it's so acid. But spending money on lime in the top 10 centimetres, hitting a pH of 5 to get rid of aluminium did absolutely nothing for the 10 to 20 layer. The pH continued to decline. On the right here, exactly the same farming system, exactly the same site. The only difference here was that their target pH was increased to get it up and over 5.5. And so the initial lime application was greater. So it was 3.6 tons of lime added in the initial year to get the pH up and over 5.5. And then agriculture happened and they acidified the soil down. And once the pH got below 5.5, they added lime again. Acidification happened, added lime again. So you got this sawtooth thing going on. But the maintenance pH was always above 5.5. And note that the amount of lime that it took to get to re-lime, to the maintenance lime, to take it back above 5.5 wasn't very much. Okay, so from memory, it ranged between 0.8 tons and 1.2 tons every 6 years to get that pH back up. So the maintenance rates of lime, these little sawtooths, whether you're on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, you're still spending the same amount of money. The only difference was that initial application to get the pH up and over 5.5. That's the only difference. But here's the thing, have a look at this next one. At 10 to 20, when the pH was maintained above 5.5 in the top 10 centimetres, the 10 to 20 pH increased, and it increased almost a unit over the 18 years of the trial. So the take-home message of that is, and I should say too, after the initial application, all those other applications, they're all surface applied with no incorporation. Okay, so this is the evidence that says once you increase the soil pH up and over 5.5, you will start impacting on the pH of the soil below in a positive way. So it is if you are not targeting that higher pH, that over 5.5, to get the alkali to move, you're spending money, but you're not improving soil lower down. On the right-hand side, you're spending the same amount of money in the subsequent years, but you're getting much more benefit from it. So hopefully the significance of that is, like, you know, with you. You're not actually saving money by having a lower target, and you're certainly not getting the agronomic response and the systems benefit from that. The only difference is that initial application, you know, 18 years ago. There's quite interest in prilled lime or like little lime granules. So it's fine lime stuck together with a binding agent, and people like the idea of that because it means that they can spread it with their normal fertilizer spreaders, or they can put it in a seed drill and sow it with their seed. So we've done some work with that. Tom Price was an honours student of mine, and he did some work with that. So we've got depth, y-axis, pH, x-axis, pH and calcium chloride. He had a control, and you can see that stratification is massive. This is in a crop soil, to be fair, but this was a good soil, class as a good soil too. And again, if you measured pH as a 0 to 10 sample, the average of that comes out to be about 5, and you wouldn't think you had an acid problem. And in fact, you've actually got layers there that are below 4.5. He mixed the soil, so he had a control where he just mixed the soil, and that little bar, I don't know what happened to my cursor, but here we go. That little bar, if we can fit that bar between data points, then the data points are significantly different from each other. And so this is saying that if we mix the soil, we can actually decrease the pH in the topsoil significantly, and we can, you know, the pH increases lower down, and all that's really doing, that's just mixing this more alkaline soil with this more acid soil. And so lower down it becomes higher pH, and up above it's getting more acid soil put in it from lower down. So it's just a mixing, right? But that's what's going on there. When you mixed in lime at 2 tonnes a hectare and incorporated it as deep as we could with offset disc, we got a pH increase down to that far. And of course, if that was just surface applied, then the pH benefit would have just been at the very, very surface. And the pH is already high there anyway. So adding lime to the surface here wouldn't have done a lot in the short term. You'd need time to get that lime to move. And then we had a control rip, which was basically, because what we're going to do, we were going to put these prilled lime, ripping it in with a seeder. And so we just had the rip with the seeder without the prilled lime to make sure that what was the effect of the ripping, and it's exactly the same as the mixing. We can see that. And then the prilled lime, it worked, and it worked well. It increased the pH in the rip row, or in the seeding row. And so prilled lime is a useful tool to have on the shelf. We can put that prilled lime in the seed row so that germinating plant can grow, get its roots down, and doesn't have to deal with the acidity that would exist if you hadn't done that. Okay, but the but is it only affects the seed row. So you've still got all this acid soil left and right of that seed row, but it does allow you to get roots down. Now that's super important if it's like this profile where the acidity is just in its narrow band. So we almost got all of it. There's still some acidity there at 15 centimeters, but that prilled lime, if we'd just got it a little bit deeper, and maybe with another year or two of leaching, we can get some of that alkali down there, and then that basically gets you a channel for that seedling to get through to the better soil where there's no aluminium. So prilled lime is definitely a goer with the seed, but if you just throw it out on the surface, there's a bunch of trials done, not by us but by other people, to show that prilled lime spread on the surface is not as effective as lime by itself, or just a surface application of lime. Just quickly finishing up, just to show you some results, some trials around, and some of you will be familiar with some of the places. And so this is all from published research. So we've got where it is, what was done. Response to lime is as a percentage relative to treatments or plots that didn't have lime added. And then we've got a gross margin compared to no lime in dollars per hectare. And all these values are the values at the date of the publication. So in some cases it's 20 years ago, and like wool prices were, 700 cents a kilogram. Whereas, well, yeah, they're better than that still now. Okay, so just bear in mind that the dollars are linked to time, history, but the productivity response to lime, that's true whether it's then or now, that'll be the same. Okay, so the trial that I showed you with the lime movement at depth over 18 years, that's this trial. And they were able to show that in perennial systems, pasture systems, they had an extra almost 4 DSE, dry sheep equivalent. So that's an increase in productivity. And what that means is they had more pasture growth. So you had a healthier system, which enabled you to run more stock. So this response to lime reported as DSE, you think about that as more grass or more pasture. And back then that gave them an extra $25 per hectare. That's after you've paid for the lime and everything. Northern tablelands, 16% more cattle, $90 a hectare. Binalong, so you've got they've got two parts of the trial there. One was just lime added, with super added every 3 years, and that got an extra 2.4 DSE. And you see there it's got a negative gross margin, and that was because there was 1 year there that was a drought, 2003 was a drought, and they supplementary fed the stock. So instead of selling the stock, like, oh, I don't have enough feed, let's destock, they said, let's just buy feed. And they did that, and all that extra feed was included in that gross margin. That's why they've got a negative number. If they put that same amount of lime on, but put super out every year with it, that's where the 5.6 DSE increase came from. So the liming with P got more grass again. They ran more stock, and even with the supplementary feeding in that case, they made more money. So that's an example of fixing the pH limitations is good, but then to get the benefit of removing that limitation, you then have to address the next most limiting thing, and in this case it was P. And so you get rid of that constraint and everything gets better again. And then in this trial, which is more recent, in only a couple of years, they got an extra DSE, which made them an extra $60. But here, and I just want to, these are perennial systems. These are all perennial systems. This Lagan trial with Matt Leschke did was great because he actually had the species composition and the species production data. And what it showed was that production benefit came from liming because the clovers were able to grow better and fix more nitrogen and contribute to the system better because the pH had been improved. And that was a surface application of lime, and not at stupid high rates or anything like that. I can't remember if it was just 2.5 tonnes a hectare. I'm not sure on that off the top of my head, but it wasn't crazy numbers. But they got a rapid response, so 1 year, 2 year response in how the pasture grew, when it grew, and what was growing, that drove the system, that made it a better system. So that was a really important bit, because what it did was you got more growth earlier on when you needed it. So there's a lot of positives to come from that. So as a summary of that, the liming got you more productivity, so it got you more grass, it got you more, which you could then turn around and run more stock on. And it also says, doing that, it will offset, the productivity will offset the cost of the lime easily based on that work. So just finishing up, if you're managing land and you're producing from it, you are acidifying the soil. So you need to know what you're doing with that. You can use a dig stick easily to go out there and see good and bad patches, and is pH my problem? You know, do I have pH stratification? What sampling depth should I be using to send my soil off to the lab? You've got to be able to measure, monitor, and manage your soils or your system. So taking one measurement 1 year and never doing it again is not very useful. It's that repeated measurement through time. If it's every year or every 2 years or every 3 years, whatever, you know, more is better, obviously, but whatever you're capable of doing, at least that gets you a change through time. That's your monitoring, and then you can manage accordingly, and you can see the effect of your management. So measure, monitor, and manage. And if you're not doing all of those three things, then you certainly can't manage effectively, and you can't provide evidence of your management impacts. There are short-term and long-term pH targets. In the short term, if we're just trying to get rid of our aluminium, that doesn't help our long-term. If we have that pH target of up over 5.5, you'll get your short-term benefits, but you also get your long-term benefits. So that's a real change in our way we think of acid soils. It's really not that helpful to just think of getting rid of aluminium, getting a pH up over 5. We really, to do the best thing for your soil based on what we've seen and what we know, that pH target needs to be over 5.5. We need to be maintaining a pH over 5.5 if we want to get the pH improved lower down. Now, I know some of you might have native pasture systems that on inherently acid soils, and the acidity is to depth, and you're thinking, well, that's not a realistic option for me. That's fine, but acknowledge that Lagan site, it still had a native pasture, but liming the surface got that extra clover production from it. So there was benefits to liming, and that might be all you want, and you're not trying to improve the pH all the way down. But at least if you can start having that conversation with yourself or with your advisors or amongst your friends. What am I trying to achieve here? Do I want to actually improve the soil pH or not? And if not, what's the ramification of that? Like, I'm never going to be as productive. That's fine. Maybe that's what you want. But if you've got these bare patches and you recognize that acidity is a problem within them, then maybe getting rid of acidity is a first step in creating a system, an environment which is then more suitable for plant growth that you're trying to get established in those bare patches. If you're driven by production and that's important to you, you've got stock, and when you don't have feed, you have to buy in supplementary feed, then have a look at some of the trials that are out there and compare what benefits you'd get from production gains, and then you can start working out, well, if I lime and I get enough productivity to run 3 extra head, then that's going to produce this much dollars, so therefore it is now economically viable for me to buy that extra feed, or maybe I can wind back the stocking rate and then I've got more feed for longer, just depending on how your pastures grow. So have a look at what's possible. And when you think about lime, don't think about it like an annual fertilizer. So many people do that, and it's like, oh, I don't lime because I don't get the returns. I can put out nitrogen fertilizer and I'll get a benefit that year. Well, that's fine, but over the long term, you're actually making your problem worse. Lime, the cost of it spread over the years that it works, is a very low cost input with a long term. Like I said, it's a sustainable thing because you're removing alkali with the agriculture that you do. Bringing in a liming product, putting in the soil is at least balancing the books in terms of acidification. And I've got examples here where we had liming events in the early 90s that are still having an effect on legume production now. So it's not an annual fertilizer. It's it's having an effect decades later. And just to finish, if soil pH is only one factor in your bare patch problem, it may not even be the problem, but you need to do the dig stick thing to find out whether it is. But most soil systems, the constraints are they're multiple constraints. And so you, like in Jenny's example in her video, you know, clearly that soil, you know, it doesn't grow things there. So it's going to have low organic carbon. It's going to have poor structure because of that. And it's probably acidic as well. So fixing that is not just fix the pH and everything's going to be fine. We have to improve the structure. We have to improve the organic carbon. And there's a bunch of things that we can do. But the first step is actually knowing what are the limitations. So there's a bunch of tests that we can do on that soil, simple tests in the field with a dig stick, with some soil structure identification and structural stability tests that we can do in the field to give us an idea of what the best management practices would need to be pulled together to make that soil suitable for plant growth. But hopefully in what we've gone through there, we understand what soil pH is, understand why it becomes a problem, and a little bit about what we can do to rectify it. So thanks, Alex.
Okay, oh, that's great. Thank you, Jason. That was a very informative presentation. So just invite you to leave your camera on.
Yep.
And Jenny, if you would like to turn your camera on and mic as well, you're welcome to. Thanks, Jenny. So I have got one question, which is what is the difference between lime and dolomite and gypsum? Would you like to chat about that, Jason?
Yep. So lime, dolomite and gypsum, the common thing in all that, they're all things that are mined out of the ground up and then applied in agricultural landscapes. They all have calcium in them, right? So they're all calcium compounds, salts. And so that's the common thing. The difference is what's with that calcium. So lime, the thing that's with the calcium is carbonate, and that's the bit that increases pH. So calcium carbonate, lime, when you add it, will increase pH and add calcium. Gypsum is calcium sulfate, and the sulfate does not increase pH. So when you add gypsum, you get calcium and sulfate, and that can some of that sulfate can bind up with aluminium, but the pH won't change. And so that has an impact on soil biology with their pH optimas. But gypsum is normally used when you have what we call a sodic soil or a dispersive soil. And so we add gypsum because it's much more soluble than lime. So it will dissolve over a whole range of different pHs, and it will improve the structure of the soil to stop it dispersing. Lime, on the other hand, at pHs over 8, it doesn't dissolve. In fact, at pH 7, it's pretty slow to dissolve as well. So whilst you're still adding calcium, in a higher pH soil, it won't dissolve. So it won't, if you've got a dispersive soil at high pH, lime doesn't do anything for you, whereas gypsum would. If you've got an acid soil, lime increases pH because of the carbonate, but gypsum doesn't do anything to the pH. And then dolomite is just like lime, but you've got calcium and magnesium with the carbonate. So early on in my talk, I spoke about if you've got a lot of aluminium, the calcium and magnesium can leach down. And so your soil test says, I've got an acid soil, there's lots of aluminium, but there's no magnesium. And so your plants can become magnesium deficient and your livestock will get grass tetany because the plants, lots of aluminium, stubby roots, can't get to the magnesium that's lower down. But, and so the recommendation would be add dolomite because it adds the magnesium and increases the pH. And you do that and everything would be great. You know, the pasture would be better. The magnesium gets into the plant, gets into the animals, no more grass tetany, that's great. Except that dolomite's like almost twice as expensive as lime. And if we know that the magnesium's just a little bit lower down because it leached down because there's so much aluminium up here, we've actually done work that shows that if you lime this bit, you get the roots to grow, it gets the magnesium and it gets into the plant and into the animals anyway. So if you know that the magnesium's lower down, you can get this, lime will actually get you the same benefit that dolomite did, but at literally half the cost. So there's value in knowing what's lower down as well. So that's the difference. So I know of some people that add lime and gypsum together, and that's fine, but they need to understand what they're doing. They're fixing pH and they're fixing dispersion, but the gypsum's fixing dispersion and the lime's fixing pH. They're both calcium sources, but they've got different jobs.
Right. Okay. All right. So, Jenny, did you want to ask anything of Jason there?
No, but I'm looking, Alex, there's some amazing questions coming in.
Sure. Why don't you ask away?
So there's one here from Sashka, and she's asking for people who aren't now engaged in intensive agriculture, but I know, or agriculture of any sort, but I actually know where she is, and she's inherited a property that has had a lot of agriculture on it. So, but she sees her role more as a land custodian. So she's wondering, is there another way to increase the pH value of the soil, perhaps compost or manure?
Yeah, so those additions, those organic additions, are bringing alkali in from somewhere else for sure. So they will increase pH. If we're sitting in a room, we're talking about this over a coffee, I'd say, look, do it in smaller scales first and look at what the effect is. So if you're going to put a ton of manure on or 2 tons of compost or whatever equivalent over a smaller area, it might be in one of these bare patches, and actually, measure what happens to that in terms of pH. What is the pH 12 months later? Did it go up? How much did it go up? Is it going to make a difference or not? So in theory, you're bringing an alkali in, so the pH should go up. The issue with the manures and even some composts, sometimes there's components within that come with that extra alkali that have an acidifying effect with time. So we've done a bunch of work bringing in, we actually use lucerne pellets as the organic source to bring in organic matter to try to bring the pH up. And what we've shown is that, the pH goes up for a period of time. And then because there's a lot of nitrogen, organic nitrogen in that, when it starts breaking down, it starts acidifying the soil. So the pH goes up and then the pH goes back to where it came from as well. So, down the track, you get a bunch of nutrition benefits. The microbes are probably thinking this is fantastic, but in terms of pH, it's a very short term, like it's not 12 months later, you can't tell you've been there pH wise. From that organic matter. I'm not saying that's going to be the same for the compost and manure, but just as an example. The key point is monitor. Do it, try it, but monitor what effect that had. And then obviously you need to have a look at the costs involved and all that sort of thing, because moving manures, depending on where it's coming from, can get expensive as well, and factor in that in your calculations of the costs involved, as you would with lime. Okay, so Haji has just asked, what is the length of a dick stick? Yeah, so it is, I'm going to say about 1 metre long, but trap for young players, you hit it in, you can get it in the ground, you can hit that in 1 metre, but it's bloody hard to get out again. So we use them for, you might hit it in 30 or 40 centimetres. And we do that because in our soils around here, by that stage, you're normally into a clay that's got really quite good properties for plant growth. So you're getting the bit that you can actually manage anyway in a short amount of time. It's hard to do things that change, that management-wise, that change soil conditions at 50, 60 centimetres. So dig sticks, they're long, but that just means you don't have to bend over so far when you're hitting them in the ground, only 30 centimetres or 40 centimetres. Okay. Would you like to ask away, Jenny?
Yeah, I've got another one here. Are there different approaches towards liming sloping land? And with many of the light soils in the capital region, we have a lot of sloping land, so it's a good one.
Yep. So different approaches. We have tried some stuff, or trialing stuff now, so I don't have results for you, but we're trialing even small amounts of incorporation running like on the contour, so but not the whole paddock, just strips. So the idea is that you're not giving an opportunity to have a long run of cultivation, which might lead to an erosion event. So we're having these little cultivations. There's still a risk. And in all the liming stuff, incorporation and the risk of erosion is the thing that I worry about more than anything else. It's by far the biggest risk, because it's a long, if you do get an erosion event, that's a long-term effect, and it's a big effect, and you caused it. So that's the thing I personally worry about. So the other things, so incorporation on sloping ground is obviously risky. So to minimize that, we are doing these bands of incorporation. Now, ideally, in a pasture scenario, ground cover is really important. So you'd have good ground cover between those bands of incorporation, but that's theoretical. I can't take you to a trial where we've done that with that better pasture growth, right? Just because we haven't done that, but it's not saying it wouldn't work. We just haven't done that yet. But that's how you get the incorporation without the erosion risk, or as much erosion risk. The other thing, winding back, is what we're doing a lot of is trialing lower rates of lime surface applied. So we are saying we're going to hit that 5.5 pH target. We're going to do it putting out enough lime to maybe affect the top 5 centimeters. And because we've picked a smaller soil depth to influence, our liming rates become less. So we've got less lime on the surface, so it's more likely to dissolve and more likely to get into the soil. And then monitor that, and once the pH gets to around 5.5, then come on and go again with a smaller amount of lime. And so what we're doing there is we're minimizing the chance of having lime applied to the surface running off a hill. Because if you don't do that and you say, well, I've got this much soil that I'm trying to ameliorate, I'm going to put on the amount of lime it takes to do that over the 20 years that I want it to do it. If you put that on the surface, you get a storm event, it's not where you need it to be anymore, but your neighbor might love you, and so, that's what we're trying to do. So not huge answers for you on that, but that's what we're trying to do. Smaller amounts of lime more often, and that might be every couple of years, every 3 years. We have to look at the change in pH. So it's a monitor and an act issue. Okay. Reading on there about lime being insoluble. Lime it does dissolve, but it dissolves really slowly. It dissolves better at lower pHs, so it works when you need it most. But as the pH gets up over sort of 6.5, the solubility drops off. So it sits there for a lot longer. I've seen microbial products advertised that talk about it impacting, making the lime more effective. So lime calcium carbonate is a mined rock. They grind it up. The smaller the particle size, if you had a kilogram of lime, the smaller the particle size, the greater the surface area, and the more surface area there is for chemical reactions to occur and for it to dissolve. So to make lime more effective, we grind it up really finely. Now, you can't add a microbial product to that lime to make it dissolve faster unless that microbial product is creating acid. So it dissolves the lime. But if your microbe that you add is creating the acid, then the lime is dissolving the acid from the microbe, and you want it to dissolve the acid in the soil. So, it's you can't, microbes don't have teeth, so they can't make that particle size smaller. Yep.
So can you see that question from Ro?
Yep. So knowing about micro, oh, right. Yep. So pH impacts microbes, and we've done work on that, and it's been done in the past. And I've got a PhD student that's spent 4 years of her life looking at this. And so you change pH, you change the activity of microbes. There's no doubt about that. And in acid soils, the microbes that exist in acid soils tend to be quite slow acting. Like, they function, but they're not, compared to microbes acting in more neutral soils, they're much more inefficient. So if we shift the pH to more favorable levels, you change the diversity of organisms, and so there are greater diversity. You've got a better functioning system. That's definitely the case. The organic matter breakdown that then happens is better because you've got a greater diversity of microorganisms. And then there's there's structural benefits from that, because as organic matter breaks down, the little products that are released actually give you stability, aggregate stability in soil, and stop it from falling apart. So that's really good. So the organic matter breakdown is a good thing for structure. And also the organic matter itself, parts of that are soluble and can leach. And we've done work here again that shows that organic matter with lime helps the alkali from that lime move more. And that's been really good. We've also found that some of that soluble organic material has organic nitrogen in it, and it moves down, lower down, and then acidifies as well. So, you know, it's one of those things, it's not all positives.
Yeah. All right. So we might just take one more from John, which says, do high magnesium levels have the same effect as high aluminium?
Yep. So high magnesium relative to calcium, or if you have a calcium magnesium ratio that is low, that means that you've got a lot of magnesium. What that tends to do is it makes your structure fall apart. So the soils, your soil will start to become, behave like a compacted soil. There won't be much porosity, much aeration in there. The roots find it hard to get through. So we call them magnesic soils, and so they are structurally limited soils. And lime and or gypsum will improve that because you're adding calcium to that. Like anything, if you've got enough of something, it will eventually become toxic. So from what I've read, the toxicity of magnesium isn't like, we don't talk about it, it's not a thing. We get structural problems in soils. As the magnesium content increases, you start getting structural problems first. Yeah.
All right. So we do have a few more questions there from Julie and one from Jamie. They're relating to nodules on legumes, and also just about where to get the dig stick. So thank you so much for that informative presentation, Jason. I'm just going to share my screen now, and then we'll come back to you and Jenny and we'll wrap the session up. We've only got about another couple of minutes and we'll be finishing up. It's 11 o'clock, believe it or not. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now. So there's a lovely picture of you, Jason, that was supposed to go up earlier. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our new project, which may help answer some of the questions that may arise out of today. I'm just going to tell you about the Small Farms Network new project, Making Small Farms Great in the Southern Tablelands. We will coordinate a citizen science project involving small farmers in the Canberra capital region. This will include ground cover demonstration plots on farms with acid and low facility soils. The demonstration plots will examine various strategies for establishing grassy ground covers on small acreages, with a view of identifying strategies that are practical, effective and easily applied on small farms. To support this project, we'll be running a series of webinars and on-farm events. The events will include some pasture establishment and species selection, how to use a dig stick, and using simple soil tests and many more topics. So just let you know that we are in the process of developing this project now, and we will have more information about our upcoming events very, very soon. So just from your feedback from today, it would be great if you could please do our webinar survey, which will come up on a Zoom link once we end the session. Or you can also send me an email at admin@smallfarmscapital.org. We also have a Small Farms Network Capital Region discussion group on Facebook. That's a public group. So if you would like to share some information or share some photographs of your bare patches, I'm just inviting you to join us there on that Facebook page, and we would love to hear about your triumphs and experiences. And it will also just let you know that we have just launched a new YouTube channel, which we have some lovely recordings from small farmers here in the capital region. And we also have the 3 other webinars that we have run in this series. So I'm just going to stop my screen share there, Jason, and invite you back and say thank you both very much for joining us today. Is there any sort of final points that you would like to share, or will we just wrap it up there?
Oh, no, just thanks for the opportunity, and yeah, really looking forward to having more involvement with the Small Farm Network, and with the COVID thing, hopefully at some stage we'll be able to get in a paddock and look at soil together and share the love. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much, and thank you to Helen for being with us today. She's sitting there quietly in the background, monitoring and helping and making sure. And she also played a very big role in enabling this webinar today. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to end the session now. Have a great day, and we hope to see you at another Small Farms Network Capital Region event soon. Goodbye.